Hello everyone, this is class number 11 and again we are still in the wrapping up of what we have done in last classes, in the last 10 classes. I am now going to talk about the American literary schools or movements again in order to solidify your understanding and to focus on certain elements of these and characteristics or features of these and themes of these schools in order to make things clearer in your mind towards American literature before moving on to being specific. Now we have been so far in the last 10 classes, and with this review class we have been so general, giving an overview of the history and the amalgamation of history, culture and publishing and their relation to literature and how they influence literature together with mass media, invention, electricity, TV, etc., etc. After all what we have been doing, we are going to move to be specific, that is to focus on certain main texts in American literature. The focus on the 12th class will be on Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. Mark Twain as a watershed, as a turning point in the American literary writing. But before that, as we have mentioned, we are going to focus now on the themes and characteristics of literary schools. And we will start with Puritanism again, which lasted from 1600s, the 17th century until the 18th century. As you can see from the picture, these people were gathered together on a religious idea. The Bible was their guide in their life, and they wanted to purify the Church of England, purify to rid it from the things that contaminated its religion. And they left England in 1620, and this is the first wave of English migration into America. That is nearly 100 years or even more after the Spanish invasion of the American soil. And they came to the New World. The term New World is the term that was used to denote the American soil, to create a utopian and idealistic colony, idealistic state where they could be free to practice their beliefs. This picture shows the religious persecution. These people escaped England for freedom of religion, but they in fact did to the people who disagreed with them the same thing they had been suffering at the hands of their fellow English people in England. You can see the situation in the scene, how people are tormented, okay? How they are persecuted, and this is mainly because of religious persecution and bigotry and extremism. And they focused here the religion, spirituality, God, no separation. They believe that there is no separation. This is the very important thing. No separation between church, government, literature, or society. Everything is melted in the pot of religion. The Bible is the guide, and you have to abide. Themes, life and literature was based on the belief of predestination, that your destiny is already written up for you. You cannot change it. God has already decided who was saved and who was damned. The kicker, no one on earth knew. Okay? We are all born evil and must strive for goodness. the idea of the original sin haunted them. The original sin when Adam ate from that tree, okay? According to the Bible, okay? Forced to live a righteous life just in case. Pre-democratic American values. They were not democratic people. The Puritans were not democratic people. Authors, Anne Bradstreet, remember when we talked about her again? To my dear and loving husband, upon the burning of my house. Okay? And Jonathan Edwards, sermons. What is sermons? Sermons are the religious speeches given on the church in order to promote repentance, remorse, sinners in the hands of an angry God. You can see from the language how these people are rooted in religious discourse. Now, this resulted in a counter school of life that is reflected in literature and shift in government, democratic, not religious. This is the Enlightenment era. This is the Enlightenment era, and the most famous figure in the Enlightenment was Benjamin Franklin. Shift to scientific thinking and experiments. Rebellion, revolution, revolt, striving for independence from Britain. Now, this is the age of enlightenment. Why did they fight? Okay. England, in fact, controlled the English people on the American soil, or the European people on the American soil. Okay? And now it imposed on them several types of taxes. Sugar Act that imposed specific tax on sugar trade, and Tea Act as well, and Stamp Act as well. All these are types of taxes that were imposed on the Europeans in America. They were not called American yet at the time. So their revolution against the British Empire was in fact the direct reason for the revolution was the taxes. And in the history of the American Revolution, there is this incident that is called Boston Tea Party. It is good to look for it. Boston Tea Party. That was a mark in the American Revolution against the British. England kept troops in America after the French and Indian War, early 1700s, without reimbursement from the crown. So they were subjected to the crown. Okay? No taxation without fair representation fell on King George III's deaf ears. Now, these people started their revolution under the banner no taxation without representation. This means that if you want us to pay you taxes, we have to be represented. We're in the English Parliament in London, because they, until this very moment, believe that they are part of England. They are part of the British Empire, because it is their mother country, and English is their mother tongue. So they thought that if we ask for representation, then if we are given representation, then we can pay tax. And they went out with this banner or motto, no taxation without representation. If you want us to pay taxes, we have to be represented in the parliament. But King George III neglected or ignored this demand. And it was, some people believe that it was a big mistake in history, a big British mistake in history. Had he accepted this demand, and had he accepted that people in America get represented in the parliament, the American Revolution would have been halted for a long time, or the American continent would have been under the British Empire sovereignty for a longer time. The authors at the time, Patrick Henry, the speech to Virginia Convention, they had this tradition of holding convention or conferences where they could exchange speeches and ideas about how to deal with the British and about how to govern themselves. Okay? Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Independence, which is a landmark in the American history. And remember, it was partly based on William Bradford's compacts on Mayflower that he made between the fellow English people who came to America. Benjamin Franklin autobiography. Phyllis Wheatley, first published African American poet. Yeah, Phyllis Wheatley is an important name in American literature, specifically because she was the first African American to learn to write, and she wrote poetry. Now, after that, we come to transcendentalism, and we have mentioned that to transcend, to move beyond, okay? Louisiana Purchase, westward expansion. Transcendentalism coincided with expansion toward the west, okay? Toward the west here we talk about California, where they acquired it from the Mexicans in 1840, okay, after a war, and it became theirs. Rebellion against Puritan beliefs. Yeah, this is transcendentalism, and it was people who rebelled against Puritan beliefs were not irreligious. They were religious somehow. Ralph Waldo Emerson, for example, who criticized the church, saying that the church acts as if God is dead, and he was marginalized after making this statement. He was a religious person. But again, he was a religious person on his own way, not according to the way the church practiced at the time. Belief in democracy and freedom. This is the time of transcendentalism, and the transcendentalism era ended with the Civil War. Themes in transcendentalist school of literature. Truth, nature is truth. These people, like Henry David Thoreau, dedicated their life to understand nature, okay? To contemplate, to reflect. Nature is God, and God is nature. Be self-reliant and stand up for what you believe. This is extremely rebellious statement, and it draws on Ralph Waldo Emerson's self-reliance. He wrote a piece under the title Self-Reliance, where you don't need to be part of a group that is led by a priest who doesn't know much in life. You don't need to put blinders on your or blinkers in your eyes. You have your own eyes. You have to be self-reliant and understand life and stand up for your understanding. Yeah, you have Ralph Waldo Emerson here, and you have Henry David Thoreau. Yeah, Ralph Waldo Emerson was called the father of transcendentalism, and he wrote Self-Reliance. Henry David Thoreau wrote Civil Disobedience. You can see how these people were against the norms, against the social norms at the time. Civil disobedience. And it may be the first time for this term to appear, civil disobedience, as the human right was first used by Thomas Paine, as you remember. And Walden is Henry David Thoreau's reflections on his stay in Walden, a place in North America, and maybe around Massachusetts or Concord. Romantics. rebelled against Puritanism and revolutionary sensibilities, wanted to examine the relationship between man, nature, and man emotions. Yeah, we've mentioned this before. Okay? The themes of the Romantic, same philosophy as Transcendentalist, with fascination with supernatural. Okay? Supernatural, something more than natural, something beyond nature, like the unseen. Okay? Has a dark side, the American Gothic movement. They were influenced by the American Gothic movement. Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven. The Raven is a famous poem. Again, we've mentioned it before. And we have William Cullen Bryant, okay, Anthroposis. Emily Dickinson, Because I Could Not Stop for Death. This is a very famous poem by her. Emily Dickinson is the contemporary of Walt Whitman, okay? And we talked about Walt Whitman and his Leaves of Grass, the collection of poems, and specifically on myself. Emily Dickinson was at the time of Walt Whitman, and people believe after a long time of her death, in fact, she wrote poetry. She wrote some 900 poems, okay? And she didn't want them to be published during her life, so they were published posthumously after her death. She discusses the idea of death, the idea of life, the gloomy aspect of life, all these elements of romantic writers at the time. Some critics believe that she is greater than Walt Whitman because her poetry is groundbreaking. She innovatively wrote poems. If we have time, we will discuss some of her poems, or one or two. Now, realism, which was a response or a consequent to romanticism, and it was connected with the war as well. It was connected with poverty, with cultural shocks, with social turmoil. Okay? It focused on portraying, describing the world as it is. Okay? Attempting to mirror real life. Writing reflects careful observations of life. Life is depicted as gritty and truthful, no fluff. Okay? Study of how we are affected by our environment. So these are main characteristics of realism. It describes life as it is. Okay? It observes nitty-gritty details of human life, and it life is depicted as gritty and truthful, okay? And the study of how we are affected by our environment, the relation between man and environment, and how environment makes the personality over time. This is neatly described by realist writing. Yeah? Human instinct focuses on middle and lower classes. Instead of roaming with ideal topics, it focused on real life of ordinary laymen in the street. And this you will see when you study Huckleberry Finn. Highly developed settings to recreate a specific time and place in history. Okay? You know that when you want to discuss a literary work, you look for the setting, the time and the place. Emphasis on human instinct, how human psychology works, develops, and acts and reacts. Authors, you can see Mark Twain and his work, Huckleberry Finn, Life on the Mississippi. This is another work by him. Stephen Crane, Red Badge of Courage, The Mystery of Heroism. And Kate Chopin, Desire's Baby. Please take care of these authors and titles as well. Okay? Now, with modernism, as you can see in the picture, modernism came to turn everything upside down. Experimentation with literary styles, especially poetry, a search for love. This is the time of anxiety, the time we have mentioned before. Modernism was a manifestation of the time of anxiety. Destruction of order, the end of the world with World War I. Authors at the time: Ernest Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea, F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby is considered to be the greatest American novel. Okay? Some people would teach it instead of Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. T.S. Eliot, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and remember his Wasteland as well. Wasteland. Richard Wright, Native Son. These are works. Now we have Harlem Renaissance. Harlem is a neighborhood in New York. And when we talk about Harlem Renaissance in American literature, we talk about African American awakening, okay? Early 1900s, where the African American started to look for an identity. It is very important for you to understand what Harlem Renaissance is. It is African American literary movement. New York served as Mecca for artists, assertion of racial pride and contributions to American culture. And here we can see the innovative treatment of jazz, poetry, art, etc. Authors of the Harlem Renaissance: Langston Hughes, I2, Theme for English B, okay, Harlem. These are works by Langston Hughes. And also County Gullen, Any Human to Another. Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God. Okay? Postmodernism to present. The Second World War until this day. You can see from the picture that everything is subjected to change. Nothing is following the tradition. People experimented with form as much as they experimented with content. Okay? Reflection of optimism and sorrow of war. Now, the war affected the Americans so much, so they started to reconsider their understanding of optimism. Sorrow hit them at heart. Okay? Idealism versus pessimism. They started to think what is ideal, what is pessimistic. Okay? Looking to the future, see fee. Lack of classical literary forms. The literary forms no more a factor of literary appreciation. People started to look for new forms. Examples of these: this is Sylvia Plath. We talked about Sylvia Plath before and how she wrote poetry in previous classes. Ariel, a collection of poems, is one of her works. Nikki Giovanni, various poetry collections. And here we finish. I want you now to sit down on these. I'll upload them for you on Moodle, and hope you understand and memorize the things that you might come across in the true and false questions or in the multiple choice questions as well, so that you are safe when it comes to exam. And please read about these writers on your own leisure time, so that you can discuss them if you are given one of their poems to analyze or to situate and contextualize in the American culture. Thank you for now, and see you in the 12th class, where we are going to focus on Mark Twain and his work Huckleberry Finn. Please read about him. Goodbye for now.